Welcome to this first Union Avatar webinar, especially focused on developers to learn how to integrate your avatar into your projects with Unity and Unreal. Many of you are working now with video games, digital platform, or augmented reality. You would like users to be able to create their own digital identity in a simple, fast, and a fun way as well. And that is why we are here today with our expert developer Alvaro Ramirez, who has been working in the game engine integration of Union Avatar and has experience in game development, 3D art, and animation. In addition to being a developer, Alvaro he has also been a speaker at Epitech, explaining the use and integration of dynamic avatars and generative AI. So, hello Alvaro, welcome to the webinar. How are you? Are you excited?
Yeah, thank you, Alicia, for the presentation, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. I think it's really cool. I get the chance to explain the SDKs we've been working on. I'm a little nervous, I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, I'm excited to see what's going to come here.
Before start, do you have any recommendation of the version of Unity or Unreal that we will need?
Yeah, for the real versions, the ones we are supporting are starting from 5.0.3. And for the Unity versions we are supporting, we are start at 2020.3, the long-term support.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with the webinar.
Okay, so let's go with the Unity one. I will present the project again as we did with Unreal, but it's essentially the same thing. We have a character, in this case it's the same character, and it's a very simple game with some simple movement. We can move around, we can jump. We have an interactor here that prints a message on the screen. A very simple case. And we want to do the same. We want to integrate Union avatars into this game. How can we do it? So the first thing is that a few requirements. The avatar needs to be a humanoid avatar in Unity. So for instance, if we go to the character we have here, as you can see, it's of type humanoid. In Unity, that means it's compatible with the Unity humanoid system. And this is what we are using for our avatars. So as long as an avatar is a humanoid or biped type, you can make use of Unity humanoid. So let's start with the beginning, and give me a second. Okay, let's import the SDK into this project. When you download the SDK, in this case it's simpler than Unreal Engine, you will just get a Unity package that you can drag and drop into your project. Okay, here it is. Let's press import. And this is going to take a little bit of time because it will automatically download and install all the requirements we have and the dependencies. So don't worry if it looks like it's not working. It's doing some jobs in the background. And while this is working, I want to take a time. I mentioned it before, but everything I'm explaining here, you have it in the documentation. So for instance, the installation of the Unity, you can find it here as well as Unreal, and more of the details that I'm not explaining in this webinar because of the time constraints. But yeah. Okay, as I mentioned, this looks like it has crashed, but don't worry, it's doing its own job. It's still installing dependencies. It's almost over.
Do you have any recommendation or advice while we are waiting?
No that I can think of. But, okay, we'll display a message to restart the editor, and we will get some errors hit, but don't worry, this will be gone once we restart the editor. We will do that in a moment. we will get a welcome message, and we have the SDK installed. We can open the documentation from the link here, and we have some settings. And as the same as the Unreal SDK, we have the cache to slow down, to make the avatar loading faster, and some other parameters. I won't go too into deep because we will run out of time. So, okay, let's start integrating the Avatars SDK here. And the best way to do it, I think, is by taking a look at the examples. So to import examples, we need to go into Window, Package Manager, and you will see here that we have the Unity Avatars that now it's deployed as a Unity Avatars package. In difference, if someone has tried the previous version, it wasn't a Unity package, now it is. And we will also see here that some of the dependencies is already installed. And if we go into the Unity Avatars package, we will see that here in samples, we have some samples that we can import. Let's go with the two first ones that are the most important. And it will create a new folder here in assets called samples. And I think I'm going to restart the editor very quickly just to get rid of these errors here. Okay, sorry about it, but it was a little bit annoying. And yeah, we have the two samples we just imported, the essential samples and the user interface. If we take a look at the essential samples and at the scenes, you will see that we have three scenes. One of them for one specific sample. One is for using the API. Another one is for importing an avatar with a link, kind of similar to the thing we did in Unreal. And the other one is for WebGL, which is kind of experimental, so we won't go into that. And if we take a look at the scene, it's pretty much empty. It has a canvas with the controls and an avatar link importer, which is essentially just a script that will do this. And you can see here that we have a variable where we can change the avatar and a player animator. And if we press play, yeah, you will see the avatar. We can move. Okay, so how can we integrate this into our game? So let's go again into the game we had before. And let's take a look at our character. Our character is very simple. It has three main components. It has a rigid body, a capsule collider, and a player movement that is what we use to make the player move and be interactable with the environment. So in order to add dynamic avatars, the thing we are going to do is to recreate the player at runtime. This is a little bit of different about the approach we made in Unreal, where we just swap the mesh of the avatar while keeping the same game object. But this is because both engines work a little bit different in these terms. And I think that it's simpler in Unity if we take this approach. And this is what I'm going to explain. So the Unity Avatars SDK creates a new object. So let's going to see how this works. Let's going to create a new script here called Unity Avatars Manager. And let me quickly open here another window, have the example so I can take a look. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to import the dependencies. In this case, we're going to use the Unity Avatars API and the Unity Avatars.avatars. And let's expose a few variables here. The first one we want to use is the avatar link to import the avatar. So let's create a new public string. We will also need the animator that we want to assign to the avatar. So and yeah, we can work with this. So in order to import an avatar, we will use a method here that you can call using the avatar importer. And here you have import avatar as humanoid. And this takes, it has a few overloads. We can load an avatar using the avatar metadata or using a URL. And in this case, this is what we're going to do. It takes a URI as a parameter. So I'm going to import system here to be able to use URI. And the other parameter it takes is an animation controller. So let's go into assign, sorry, the one we created. Okay, you will see that it gets a warning because this function is asynchronous, and we call it in this method, which is not. So let's make the start void async and await it. Okay, and this is very simple, but it will serve as a starting point. So if we now create an empty object here, let's call it UI manager. Let's place it. Okay, if we now assign the script we just created, it will ask us for an avatar link. Let me take what I have here. Okay, let's take the same one as before. And for the animator controller, let's assign the one we are using in our game. In this case, if we take a look at the night model inside of animations, we have the night animator I created, and let's use that. And when we now press play, we will see that the avatar gets loaded into the game. But as you can see, there's no input. You can control it, and it's appearing under the ground. So we need to make this game object playable. So let's go again into Union Avatars Manager and start adding this functionality. The first thing we might want is to set an initial position. So let's create a vector and call it start position. And let's create a new method to set up the player. It's going to call setup player, and we will pass the game object we're creating here. If you take a look at the import avatar humanoid function, it returns a game object. So we can actually get the game object doing this. And this will return us the object it creates. And I'm going to pass it to the function. And cool, we will do all the setup inside of this. So as mentioned, the first thing we want to do is set up the initial position. And we also want to change the layer, for example. And let's also give it a tag so we can interact with the object we had in the scene. Oh, sorry. Okay. So this is like not much. It will just make the avatar spawn at another position, but we still doesn't have the required components to make it playable. So yeah, I didn't assign a start position. Okay, let's take a look at our previous player and see what components we need to assign. We need to assign a wrist body, a capsule collider, and the player movement we have. Okay, so let's do this very quickly. I'm going to do a little bit of cheat here. to make things a little bit speed up, I'm going to actually copy and paste some code, but need to change the reference here. But what we are doing here, it's very simple. We are just adding a rigid body component, assigning the variables we need, the same for the capsule collider, the same for the player movement. So again, if we now press play, cool, you will see that we have the character and we can move it and do the same things we did as with the other character, and it can interact also with our thing, but the camera is not following the character. So let's going to add these two. I am using a Cine Machine, and it has two parameters here, follow what and look at. So we are going to set them. So we need to import Cine Machine here and expose a new variable. And let's create a new method called setup camera, where we are going to pass the avatar object. And here we just want to set the follow variable and the look at. So follow equals avatar object dot transform, and the same for the look at. And that should be it. Let's check it. Okay, we got an error because we didn't assign the Cine Machine free look here. Okay, cool. We kind of have it. We replaced our avatar with a dynamic avatar generator at runtime. We can change the link for another one we want. Let's take another one just for testing a little bit. All right. So I think we still have time. Yeah. Let's use the user interface. I want to show you first the user interface, and then we'll jump into platform credentials, which is a thing we added in the new version. But okay, let's go to the user interface first. If you take a look here at the samples, you will find that we also have a user interface sample that you can use. And sorry, another thing I missed. If we take a look at the documentation, you will see that we have a project requirements tab here. And the most important one is to add a new layer called avatar. We use this layer especially for the user interface for managing the views and the transparency. So I missed that. Let's create it. I don't know. The number doesn't matter. You can create it whatever you want. And let's verify. Yeah, it's here. Yeah, we have an interface kind of similar to the real one, but this is actually made inside of Unity, and it makes use of Unity components to make it work. So how can we add this to our game? We will need to do a little bit more of a scripting. So let's go again into our Union Avatars Manager. And we can also open here the Union Avatars Loader UI. And this is what we are using in the samples to load the avatar UI. And then I will try to run over this a little bit quick. So the first thing we need is the UI prefab, as you can see here. So let's going to take this. And the user interface also needs to use a session, which is, I'm going to explain a little bit what is the session in the Unavatars SDK. So as you can see here, we are creating a private variable called server session, And a session in Union Avatars SDK is basically the main object. In this case, we call it a session. It's the responsible to make all the API calls and essentially interaction with the Union Avatars API. As you can see, we have methods for logging, getting the bodies, all of the internal stuff. In case you want to manually work with the API, all you need is just a session and call these methods here. It has like a little brief summary of what everything does. And it's what we are going to use for the user interface. So in here, let's go into initialize the session. I'm going to comment this out because it was for the previous example. Let's go into initialize it. So we call new server session. And we need to pass a URL, in this case for the API. We are going to copy the one that it's in the sample. And we have some optional methods for logging into Unity. So yeah, I want to print logs to Unity. And cool. Let's copy and paste the code we have here to load the UI so we don't have to write it again from scratch. But overall, it's very simple. The thing it's doing here. We're going to get rid of this as we are not using it. Oh, and we also need to import, the Union Avatars.ui namespace. Okay, now we can use the UI. So what we are doing here is just instantiating the UI prefab into the scene and getting the UI avatar manager. You don't need to worry much about it. It's just a mono behavior that has some events where we can subscribe. In this case, you see here that we have an event on avatar selected. This will get called whenever we select an avatar to load into the UI or when we create an avatar. We also have an event when we close the UI, but we are not going to use this by now. And after instantiating the UI, we're also calling setup UI, which takes a session as a parameter, and we are passing the session we just created in the start method. And I'm going to create a method to subscribe to the event. In this case, when an avatar gets selected, it will call this event, this method called build avatar, and it will pass an avatar metadata. And so what can we do here? Well, we can copy the code we did before to load an avatar using a link. But now let's make this async to make it work with the avatar importer. Instead of passing the avatar link we made before, we can now pass this avatar metadata you see here. And the rest of it can remain the same. So now, if we press play, okay, no, it won't work because I'm missing some hints here. I'm missing a UI prefab, and the UI prefab it's located here inside of samples. User interface, prefabs, GUI, and it's this one here. Don't mistake it with this one. This one is like the empty game object we use in the sample. The actual prefab it's inside of here, GUI. As you can see, it's just a canvas. And all the UI is split into modules. So for example, you have here the avatar slot, you have the login module. And for example, in case that you want to modify this user interface, and I don't know, maybe change color so it adapts better to your game, what I would suggest is that you actually make a copy of the GUI folder completely. So you can like replace all the references, because having it here into samples, it can lead like maybe when you update the SDK or import the sample, this can get overwrite. So I would make a copy of the GUID folder and put it somewhere else in your project so you can make the changes. Okay, let's assign this. And if we now press play, we'll see that nothing happens. Okay, I think I'm missing Yeah, I'm not calling the load UI method. I'm going to call it after creating the session. Cool. And we have the user interface. You will see that we can click it, and this is a dumb mistake. You in your scene, if you don't have any UI, you might actually be missing an event system. So make sure to take a look that you actually have one. I didn't. So go into game object UI and create an event system, and now you can interact with the UI. And that's it. Let's put our credentials. And you will see here all the avatars we created. I'm going to take, I don't know, this one maybe. And cool, we have it. We're running a little bit out of time, but I will run very quickly over the platform credentials because it's something that I wanted to explain. It's also here in the documentation. So if you're a platform that has sorry, does anyone want to say something? I hear a micro.
No, it's me. Sorry, it's me.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so that's it. When you have, if you have platform credentials into your avatars, that means that we have given you some credentials for the main API. You can actually use this in your multiplayer game to let users do some cool stuff. For example, having custom bodies that other users cannot see. For example, we've made a dummy account on the main API just to show you this to you. But we have this body here that it's not in the default list of bodies, so users cannot see this body by default. But we have some platform credentials that allow us to see this body. So how can we use them? If you go into here, you will find a snippet of code that we can just call after creating a session. So I'm going to copy and paste this. And what this is doing is getting an authorization token by calling login super to log in the super authorization. This is how we call it. And we will need to pass your platform credentials, your API credentials here. I'm going to make this into a separate window so I can not show them. Oh, but before, let's let me after creating after logging and getting the authorization token, what we need to do is pass this authorization token to the session we made. And to do this, we need to call session, getting the session context, and setting the super authorization token, as we see here. Again, I don't have like much time to explain this as much as I want, but you can take a look at the documentation. So let me add the data missing. And okay, we compiled. And if we now press play, I have added the super authorization of my platform credentials. And if I now log in with my normal credentials, sorry. Okay, the first thing you will notice is that we don't have any avatar created, and this is because we are now logging in under the platform credentials we use, and we haven't created any avatar in this platform, so we can't see anything. And I just got an error here. I think it's because I'm using the camera on Discord, and Unity doesn't let me use it. But I'm going to upload an image instead of taking a picture with the webcam. Yeah, well, as you can see, the avatar now generated, and we have the body. This body is one body that we can only see because we are using the platform credentials I input in the code. but otherwise normal users won't be able to see it. I won't be able to select now because this body doesn't work and it will make the SDK fail. But as you can see, it displays on the list. So yeah, this was what I wanted to explain. And I think we can call this explanation done.
So thank you very much for your explication. I think that it will be very helpful for our amazing developers.
Yeah, again, thank you everyone for doing this. And I apologize if it's a lot of content. I wanted to run over a lot of things, but I think I explained everything I wanted to. And yeah, overall, it has been really cool to be able to do this.
Thank you, guys. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye
Bye.
Thanks,
bye.
guy.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.